They lied to you. Every mentor, every teacher, every motivational poster nailed to a wall, they handed you a philosophy designed not to elevate you, but to contain you. And while you performed goodness for an audience that never rewarded it, someone darker, someone more complete, walked past you and claimed the life you were supposed to live. That comfortable prison. You were not raised to succeed. You were raised to comply. From the moment you were old enough to receive instruction, the world began trimming you. Your rage was called inappropriate. Your ambition was labeled arrogance. Your refusal to conform was diagnosed as a problem requiring correction. And slowly, over years of that process, you learned to perform a version of yourself that made everyone around you comfortable. Their comfort became your cage. Think about what that cost you in real, measurable terms. The room where you had the idea first, but stayed silent because you feared being wrong. The relationship where you gave endlessly, adjusted endlessly, held your tongue endlessly, and got abandoned anyway. The opportunity you circled for months, being patient, being responsible, while someone with half your capability and twice your audacity claimed it without hesitation. That was not bad luck. That was the price of your conditioning. Machiavelli watched brilliant men lose everything in 15th century Italy because they refused to operate in the reality that existed. They kept operating in the reality they wished existed, where goodness was rewarded, where patience was honored, where the moral man inherited the earth. He watched them lose kingdom after kingdom, and he wrote it down, not as a warning, as a diagnosis. The comfortable prison has no visible bars. You cannot fight what you cannot see. And the first wall of this prison is the belief that your suppressed instincts and buried drives are weaknesses to be ashamed of, rather than weapons waiting to be trained. The shadow that runs your life. Anyway, Carl Jung called it the shadow, the repository of everything you decided you are not allowed to be. Every impulse toward dominance you suppressed. Every calculated move you apologized for before making it. Every time you felt the instinct to cut cleanly, to draw a hard line, to act without softening the edges, and then talked yourself out of it because you were afraid of what it would reveal about you. Here is what Jung discovered, and what you need to hear directly. The shadow does not disappear when you suppress it. It goes underground. And, underground, without your conscious direction, it operates anyway. It becomes the passive aggression you deploy when you cannot be directly honest. It becomes the resentment that poisons your generosity from the inside. It becomes the self-sabotage that arrives precisely when success is within reach. Because some unmastered part of you has never been allowed to define what success actually means on your own terms. The people you call cold, the ones you secretly study for their clarity, their decisiveness, their ability to move without needing consensus, they are not colder than you. They are more integrated. They have had the conversation with themselves that you keep postponing. They looked into their own capacity for ruthlessness, for strategic withdrawal, for silence used as a weapon, and instead of running from it, they sat with it, understood it, brought it into conscious control. You cannot master what you will not acknowledge. And the first act of real power is not a business decision or a change of environment. It is the moment you stop performing goodness for an audience and start excavating honesty for yourself, what Machiavelli actually meant. The name Machiavelli has become shorthand for villainy. People whisper it like a curse, but read him, actually read him, and you will not find a monster. You will find the most ruthlessly honest political psychology ever committed to paper. He was not advocating cruelty. He was diagnosing necessity. He identified the precise qualities separating rulers who survived from rulers who were destroyed. It was not intelligence. It was not virtue. It was the capacity to act effectively in the reality that existed rather than the reality one preferred. He wrote that a prince who is always good will come to ruin among those who are not good. Read that again. Always good, not sometimes, always will come to ruin. because the world is not always good, and a man who cannot operate in a world that is not always good is a man whose goodness becomes a liability rather than an asset. He introduced the lion and the fox. The lion has force but cannot recognize traps. The fox recognizes traps but lacks force. The effective ruler must be both. Force without perception gets outmaneuvered. Perception without force gets ignored. The integration of both is what Machiavelli called virtue. Not virtue in the moral sense. Virtue as complete human capability. The capacity to be gentle when gentleness serves, and devastating when devastation is required. Not as a personality trait, as a conscious, deliberate, trained choice. When they taught you that your edges were wrong, they did not make you better. They made you half, and Machiavelli predicted exactly where half would leave you. The anatomy of real power. Power is not volume. Most people think power is the loudest voice, the most aggressive posture, the person who dominates with noise. That is not power. That is insecurity, performing confidence. Real power is the quality of presence that shifts the energy in a room without announcing itself. You have felt it. You have walked into a space where someone carried it, and you felt the gravitational pull before they said a single word. That is not surface charisma. That is integration radiating outward. The person who carries that quality has done something specific. They have confronted their own capacity for darkness, their ability to withdraw approval, enforce consequences, walk away without explanation, operate in silence while others need to be seen, and they have made peace with it, not celebrated it, made peace with it. And that peace reads to every human nervous system in proximity as power, because every person you encounter is reading whether you know what you are capable of, whether your generosity is a choice or a compulsion, whether your patience is strategic or just fear of confrontation wearing a patient face. Marcus Aurelius commanded legions and governed an empire while writing privately about the discipline of perception and the command of internal states. He was not a passive philosopher. He was an active ruler who understood that external power begins with interior command. Epictetus, born a slave, developed a philosophy of such radical interior sovereignty that he became one of history's most influential thinkers from a position of zero external power. They were not suppressing their darkness, they were directing it. Every impulse toward anger became fuel for discipline. Every drive toward dominance became the engine of self-mastery. That redirection is the anatomy of real power, the strategic silence of dangerous people. There is something specific about the people who win at the highest levels. They do not explain themselves. This is not arrogance. This is strategy. Machiavelli observed that the prince who constantly announces his intentions, justifies his decisions, and seeks the approval of those he governs has already surrendered the psychological high ground. Explanation implies accountability to the listener. Accountability to the wrong listeners is the beginning of the end of effective power. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is deception, not because deception is virtuous, but because the one who reveals his full position, full capability, and full intention gives the opponent every tool needed to construct a defense. This applies to every negotiation you have ever entered, every competitive situation, every dynamic where someone played the long game while you played the honest game. Transparency is a virtue between equals operating in good faith. In a competitive situation, in an unequal situation, transparency is not virtue. It is vulnerability offered without reciprocity. This does not mean become deceptive. It means become strategic. Silence is a move. Patience is a weapon. The willingness to hold ambiguity while others scramble for resolution is a form of power most people have never accessed because they were taught that discomfort must be resolved immediately, that silence must be filled, that uncertainty is a problem requiring an answer. The person who has mastered their darkness can hold silence indefinitely. can wait while others perform their anxiety, can operate at full effectiveness while revealing nothing prematurely. That capacity is not coldness, it is control. And control at that level is what 10,000 years of human history have consistently called power. The ones who quit softness and won. Remove the mythology from history and examine the decisions underneath it. Every individual who built something that outlasted their lifetime made a specific kind of decision at a specific kind of moment. The moment when softness was the expected response, and they chose something harder, not crueler, harder. And that choice, repeated, conscious, integrated into a consistent way of operating, was what separated the builder from the reactor. Alexander the Great was tutored by Aristotle, taught rhetoric, ethics, philosophy, the full scope of Greek intellectual tradition. Then he took that education into 3 decades of campaign and built an empire that permanently altered the shape of civilization. He was not brutal without reason. He was precise with force and extraordinarily strategic with mercy. He knew when destroying resistance sent a message that prevented 10 future conflicts. He knew when showing mercy to a conquered ruler created loyalty that no force could manufacture. He calibrated. That conscious deployment of both darkness and restraint as strategic instruments, not reflexive responses, separates a builder from someone who simply reacts to everything life places in front of them. Look at every founder who disrupted an industry, every creator who built something undeniable while the comfortable ones stayed safe and invisible. Study the decisions inside the story, not the story itself. You will find the same pattern every time. Moments of deliberate ruthlessness, moments of strategic silence, moments where they refuse to explain, refuse to apologize, refuse to soften the message to protect someone else's comfort. Each of those moments was the dark side deployed consciously in service of something larger. That is not cruelty. That is the curriculum they never taught you. The integration process. Integration, not suppression, not unleashing. Integration. This is where the philosophy becomes a practice, and the practice becomes a way of operating that permanently expands what you are capable of achieving. Integration means you know the full map of your own psychology. You know where your capacity for coldness lives. You know your capacity for calculated patience, for strategic withdrawal, for the decisive action that burns a bridge intentionally because the bridge was leading you somewhere smaller. You know these things not because you have acted on them recklessly, but because you have faced them honestly. The practice begins with a brutal inventory. Sit down and write the list of instincts you have suppressed in the last year. Every time you felt the pull to draw a hard line and instead compromised past your own boundary. Every time you felt the instinct to walk away and instead performed patience that was actually fear. Every time you felt called to act decisively and waited instead for a consensus that was never going to arrive. That list is your shadow. That list is the inventory of your undeployed power. Then ask the harder question. Not why you suppressed those instincts you already know, why it was trained into you. Ask what would have happened if you had acted from a place of conscious decision rather than conditioned reflex. In most cases, the honest answer is this: things would have moved faster. You would have lost less time. You would have communicated more clearly. You would have attracted people who respond to clarity rather than being slowly drained by people who exploit softness. Integration is not about becoming someone you are not. It is about becoming the complete version of who you already are, including the parts that were trimmed out of you by people who needed you manageable. Fortune favors the prepared dark. Machiavelli wrote that fortune is like a flood. It moves, it destroys, it operates on its own logic. But he also wrote that the prepared man builds channels before the flood arrives, not to stop fortune, to direct it. The ones destroyed by fortune are always those who met it unprepared, who had not done the interior work, who had not integrated their full capability before the moment of crisis demanded it. This is what most people miss entirely. They think dark side mastery is relevant only in obvious conflict, only in competition, only in the moments that look like warfare. They are wrong. Dark side mastery is most relevant in the ordinary moments, the meeting where you must hold your position without flinching, the conversation where you must deliver a truth the other person does not want to receive, the decision point where every comfortable instinct says, wait, soften, adjust, and the integrated self knows that waiting will cost everything. Fortune arrives without announcement. Your preparation is not random. And preparation at this level is not logistical, it is psychological. The Stoics called this the premeditation of adversity. Marcus Aurelius trained himself to confront in imagination every difficulty he might face, so that when difficulty arrived in reality, no part of his psychology was meeting it for the first time. The decision had already been made in calm, so it did not need to be made in chaos. That is the specific advantage of integration. Not that you become invulnerable, but that nothing about your own psychology ambushes you at the moment when everything depends on your next move, the person you are afraid to become. There is a version of you that you are afraid of, not because it is monstrous, because it is capable, because it does not need permission, because it knows what it wants and moves toward it without the performance of hesitation you have been using to seem relatable, seem humble, seem safe to the people whose opinion you were never supposed to be managing in the first place. That version of you draws hard lines and does not negotiate them into nothing. That version of you can sit inside someone else's disappointment without immediately trying to fix it. That version of you makes decisions that serve a larger vision and holds them even when the room disagrees. That version of you is not cruel. It is simply not concerned with being liked. And that distinction, the distance between needing to be liked and choosing to be respected, is the entire game. Everything else is detail. You have been afraid to become that person because you were taught that ambition corrupts, that power changes people, that the one who moves without apology is the villain of the story. But you are not in a story. You are in a life. And in a life, the person who moves consciously from a place of integrated self-awareness with full knowledge of their own darkness and full command of when and how it serves does not become the villain. They become the standard. They become the proof. The fear of your own capability is the last wall of the prison they built inside you before you were old enough to object. The only way through that wall is not a hope or a vision. It is a decision. Final law. The dark is the resource. This is the final law. Not a suggestion, not a perspective for consideration. The law. Your darkness is not the obstacle to your success. Your darkness is the undeployed resource of your success. Every moment of calculated coldness, you were shamed into suppressing resource. Every instinct toward decisive action you buried because you feared the judgment of people who were not building anything resource. Every hard line you felt called to draw and softened into irrelevance resource. All of it sitting in an account you have never accessed, accruing interest in the form of frustration, resentment, and the grinding awareness that you are operating at a fraction of your actual capability. Machiavelli is not the villain of history. He is the most honest voice in it. Sun Tzu is not a manual for warfare. It is a manual for complete preparedness. The Stoics are not preaching detachment. They are preaching sovereign command of self. They arrived at the same truth from different directions and different centuries. The place where you have looked fully at what you are capable of, including the uncomfortable parts, the ruthless parts, the parts that do not perform well at dinner tables, and said, I know this is here. I decide when and how it serves, not my conditioning, not my inherited fear, me. That moment of decision is not the end of your development. It is the only beginning that was ever going to matter. Every version of growth you attempted before integrating your darkness was growth on a cracked foundation. Now the foundation is complete. Build from this place. Move from this place. The world does not reward the good. It rewards the complete. And for the first time, you know exactly what complete means. If this disturbs something in you that comfortable content never reached, that is recognition, not accident. Drop the word shadow in the comments, not as ritual, as the first conscious move of someone who is done performing half of themselves for an audience that was never worth that sacrifice. If this script opened something that needed to be opened, give it a like, not for the algorithm, but as a signal to yourself that you are choosing a different quality of thinking from this point forward. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what comes next goes deeper: the psychology of power, the philosophy of the builders, the curriculum that was never offered in any room you sat in. The next video is already there. The question is the same one it has always been. Are you ready to stop being comfortable and start being complete?